I'm Shane and welcome back to Relative Time. I actually started this channel 2 years ago this week, and I did it by reviewing a Timex I just happened to pick up, which is why I celebrated my 1-year anniversary last year by reviewing another Timex. And that was actually the plan for this year as well, as I do have one lined up. But at the last minute I decided to do something a little bit different, and in some ways just give back a little. The last few years have been just a really crazy journey, and it wouldn't have been possible without those of you who tune in time and time again. And over those 2 years, I have learned a lot, and not just about watches and horology, but also about photography, videography, editing, and just kind of how YouTube works. And every once in a while, someone asks me for some advice. They're either starting a channel or already have one. So I thought I'd take this opportunity just to share a little bit about what I've learned. And if you're someone who has a channel and you have more specific questions, feel free to ask them below in a comment or even email me. I'm happy to help. And if you're not interested, well, this could just be a sneak peek behind the curtain and could give you some insight, not just to why I do certain things, but why other channels might do them as well. First off, let's talk equipment. And honestly, you could talk for hours about equipment. But generally speaking, when you first start out, just try to use what you have before you go out and buy anything else. There are some exceptions to this, and specifically when it comes to watch channels, it all just kind of depends on what you want to do. If you're doing something where you really want to show off the watch in really good up-close detail, you might need something else. Most point-and-shoot cameras and cell phones, they just really don't focus well up close. They're really not made for that. And when I first started this, I tried a number of things. I tried my cell phone, an old point-and-shoot camera, a webcam, and even an action camera. And the only thing that actually worked was my iPad. So I wound up using that for a while, even with a limited amount of memory on it. And it wasn't until I hit the requirements for monetization that I actually went out and bought a good camera, because then I knew it would actually pay for itself. But again, try to use what you have, and if at first it doesn't work, then try to figure out a workaround. Like taking a high-resolution picture from farther away, and then just zoom in while editing. Or shoot at 2K or 4K and then do the exact same thing. The one exception to all of this, I think, is audio. You could have the most beautiful, crystal clear picture in the world, but if someone can't understand what you're saying or there's too much background noise, they're not going to watch, they're not going to stick around, and they're not going to subscribe. And even if you have decent audio and you're ready to spend some money to upgrade some equipment, better audio is always the first thing you should do, followed maybe by some better lighting. And I actually use a couple of different microphones, each with a specific purpose in mind. But the best all-around microphone I found is actually a lavalier mic. You can pretty much use it in every condition. And you can actually get a pretty good one without spending a lot of money. Now I think this is a better one, but I used a $15 one for the longest time, and it sounds almost as good as this. Now with those, you will have to record the audio separately and sync it, but it's really not hard to do. Now the biggest reason I recommend not buying anything until you really get into it isn't just to save you money if you give up after a couple of episodes, but really because you don't necessarily know what you need until you really get into it and start learning it and start trying it. That, and it's pretty much a guarantee that your first few videos will suck. I mean, it's pretty much a universal truth. I mean, you really have no idea what you're doing, and oftentimes you're just winging it. Seriously, just go look at the first few videos of any big channel, and they'll just suck compared to what they're doing now. And if it doesn't, then the odds are it's not their first rodeo. Which, as a side note, is also why I recommend saving your good ideas until maybe episode 4 or 5. You don't necessarily want to waste them when you don't have any idea what you're doing. So everyone sucks at first, and it's okay. Just embrace the suck. Use that time to really just figure out what you like to do, what you want to do, and even what you're good at. Find your voice, or your style, or your format, or whatever you want to call it. And a lot of that has to do with what your strengths are. There are a lot of skills that go into making one of these videos and running a channel, and no one is really good at all of them. For example, you might have a channel where the host is extremely knowledgeable when it comes to horology, but they don't know anything about videography or even editing after the fact. So oftentimes those channels kind of run like a podcast. And on the opposite spectrum, you might have someone who knows nothing about horology, but they just have that personality, that kind of gravitas that they're interesting to watch. So oftentimes those videos just really focus on that individual and their kind of reaction to things. So you really want to use these early days just to learn, to experiment, and just kind of figure out what you want to do with all of this. Running a channel is a bit of a time sink, but no matter how much time you spend having fun creating videos, make sure you're still keeping up to date with other channels, as well as other formats like websites and forums. As one of the great things about this hobby is just the community, and how everyone just really likes to share what they've learned and what they've experienced. Which is why, and I really want to stress this point, that you should make sure that you're an active member and participant in that community, and you're not just using it for self-promotion, which is kind of a whole other conversation. But you should do this not just to keep up to date with things, but also to make connections, especially with other creators. We all know how hard this is, and when you join that community, you just kind of automatically join a whole support group. So you'll always have someone to bounce some ideas off of, or just ask some simple questions. Now, after you find your stride, that's really when you should start looking at how to grow your channel. And that's really where the marathon begins. And the hardest part of all of that is just picking a topic to do a video on, and it can be a bit of a balancing act. Now, you always want to pick a topic that you have an interest in, because if you don't, there really isn't a point to doing the video. But at the same time, you want to pick a topic that other people also have an interest in, because if they don't, well, no one's going to find you. But when picking a topic, you also want to find that sweet spot between something popular and something that hasn't been done to death already. If you pick something obscure, no one's ever going to find it. But you also don't want to pick something so popular that it's already been done to death. Because if you do, your video is just going to get lost in the shuffle. Now, a good example of this is my original Vostok Amphibia video, or my original Orient Bambino video. Those are two really popular watches, and the response when I first put them out was a lot less than I thought they'd be. So you really just want to find that sweet spot. Or if you're doing something that is really popular, then just do a different take on it. For example, with both of those watches, I actually did follow-up videos where I did something a little bit different. And in each of those cases, those follow-up videos performed far better than the originals. And along those same lines, you can look at my most popular video to date, which is of a Seiko SNZG11. And looking back, one of the reasons it did so well, even though it was a popular watch with a number of SNZG videos already out there, was that all those other videos were on the black dial version, and almost nothing on the blue version. Which wasn't planned, it was just a happy coincidence that I wanted the blue one. But the end result was that when anyone looked for that blue version, that was the video they found. The only real way to grow on YouTube is basically people have to find your videos. And the only way that really happens is when the almighty YouTube algorithm decides to bless you with its favor. And that may sound like a bit of an exaggeration, but seriously, it's not. In a lot of ways, YouTube is unfair, just kind of like life. There are really two ways your videos are found. Either the algorithm recommends them to other people, or the algorithm decides to rank them higher when people search for a particular topic. Now, the best way to ensure that this happens is just to make the best video you possibly can. But other than that, there are a few things you can do to increase the odds of this happening. But really, a lot of it is still out of your control. And in a lot of ways, most of what you do here is just common sense. Make sure you have a good description, a good number of tags, and a good, really catchy title. But the most important thing you can do is have a good thumbnail, and that's even ignored by a lot of larger channels. Which is stupid when you think about it. It's really the first thing people see, and it's the first impression of you and their channel. So you do want to make a good one. So learning just a little bit of Photoshop skills really pay off here. And really try to stay away from clickbait. It's kind of a whole other topic, and it can help, but no one really appreciates it. Now, one of the frustrating things with YouTube is that they're always changing and adapting how the algorithm picks things, so you're never quite sure what's going on, other than just staying tuned into the community as a whole. And some of the more recent changes have actually made having a good thumbnail even more important. Which is also one of the reasons you may have seen some larger channels also try to really up their thumbnail game. In the past, most of what the algorithm used to determine if it should share your video was really just how much people watched of it and how much they engaged with it, by either leaving a comment or giving you a thumbs up or thumbs down. But right now they're putting a lot more emphasis on a newer metric called click-through rate. And it's basically how often when they show your video as an option that people pick it versus everything else. And the catch here is that they're not just using this metric to decide if they should show your video to new people, but also if they should even show your video to your current subscribers. which is honestly just kind of frustrating. And I think it's also one of the reasons that clickbaity titles and graphics have actually gotten worse over the last few months. And also one of the reasons people keep yelling to hit that bell icon, because that's supposedly the only way you know if something new comes out. Now don't get me wrong here, the whole thing is very rewarding and in the end it is very worth it, but it's still frustrating at times, and not just for new creators, but even established creators. And in a lot of ways it's kind of like life. You can either sit around bitching about how it's unfair, or you can just keep moving forward and do everything you can to stack the deck in your favor. That way when you do get frustrated, you can always look back and see how far you've come, and just be grateful for the accomplishments you've had, for the videos you've made, the skills you've developed, and the people you've helped and talked to. Not to mention maybe a few new friends along the way. Which is why I think the best advice I can give you for those days when it just gets really frustrating actually comes from the musician Ray Wylie Hubbard. And the days I keep my gratitude higher than my expectations, well, I have really good days. Again, this is Shane with Relative Time, and I thank all of you who joined me over the last 2 years. See you soon.